Okay. So, as Becca said, this is there's a little note up there at the top. I don't know if you all want to have this as a PDF and make it available to anybody that wants it, but that's totally fine if you want a copy. But the funding was provided in part by a grant from the EPA through the 319 program, administered through the Division of Water, who's here, and then awarded to Oldham County. And so obviously want to thank them for supporting this. So I am always delighted to be in Oldham County because number one, I don't have to drive far to get here. I just live in Louisville, and a lot of my other projects are pretty far away. So, but more seriously, I was one of the primary authors on the original grant way back in 2005, 2006. That we saw Curry's Fork was impaired. Oldham County Fiscal Court was interested in trying to work with through the grant process and try to get a plan to get it restored. And so I wrote that grant, and then my wife and I had to go on and do some different things. She had to get some training for being a doctor, and so I obviously went with her, and I left. And I'm so delighted to see how far Oldham County has come with not only the writing and execution of this plan, but also the implementation. It's really one of a handful of grants in Kentucky, watershed plans in Kentucky, that continue to have good support from like fiscal court and other stakeholders, and really keep making progress towards to getting that plan implemented and actually seeing results in the stream. So extremely happy to be a part of it whenever I can. And this is, as Beck said, this is one of our specialties at Sustainable Streams is how do you sort of optimize your stormwater control program up in the watershed to actually be protective of the streams that you're trying to protect. So it's one thing to sort of do like, this is exactly what every other city does in America, or this is exactly what the state tells me to do. But is that investment that you're making, putting a detention basin in the ground, is it actually protecting the stream? Is it actually protecting the property owners that live next to the stream from erosion? Is the stream as good as it was before the development went in, for example? And if we can optimize the investment, right, to actually be protective of the stream, then we would be really at the front edge of stormwater management. And that's what this presentation is about. And it's really drawing very strongly from a case study in Northern Kentucky. So a peer community in Northern Kentucky, instead of just one county, it's 3 counties together that have one stormwater management district up there called SD1. But they've been doing this kind of a data-driven approach to tailoring their stormwater management to manage, to be more protective of streams. They've been doing this for over 10 years. And so we got, not only do we have the science behind it, but we have some implementation to show us how we're doing in terms of results. So, and because Northern Kentucky is in basically the same physiographic region, basically the same ecoregion, it's a very good example for Oldham County. It's not to say it's a perfect, just copy and paste it for Oldham County, but it's a good example of what worked up in Northern Kentucky's probably got a pretty good chance of working pretty well in Oldham County, and the sort of stakeholder process and working with the development community and engineers to get that process tailored I see a lot of similarities between Northern Kentucky and Oldham County. So I'm the person presenting this, but I have a huge team that supports me, not only my staff, but a lot of staff at SD1. Our long-term client has helped with the data collection and funding a lot of the research that went into this. And then, of course, Oldham County's been supporting this watershed grant for going on almost 15 years now. And then the Curry's Fork Watershed Group, and then the Division of Water. So yeah, just lots of people to acknowledge. And then I tend to throw a lot of content at you. I don't want people to fall asleep, so I try not to go too slow. But if I'm going too fast and you want me to repeat something, feel free to slow me down. Just speak up. But also, our website, we have all of our papers links to all of our papers, so that, if you want more information on one topic or something, you can go to our website. It's really easy to find, and many of our papers are publicly available, and the ones that are not, where you have to pay to get them, you can just email me and ask me for a copy, and I can give you a personal copy of a paper. So anyway, lots of like the sort of the meat of how you do it is described in those papers and so forth. But another resource is kind of these, they call them infographics, but basically this is just a poster. But this presentation is like 2 hours. This poster is kind of a summary of all the high points. So that's like an 11 by 17 that can kind of keep, you could walk away with that if you wanted it. So just shoot me an email if you're interested in something like that, or check out our website. So to begin, conventional stormwater management and stream health. It's no surprise that when you put when you take a bunch of a forested watershed, and you take the trees away and you replace them with houses and streets and such, it's no surprise that when you look at the biological richness of the streams that drain those lands, they tend to be much different than the richness of streams in an undeveloped forested watershed. And so here is, these data are from Northern Kentucky, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this too well, but you see this shape, right? Kind of a steep drop off, right? So this is basically impervious area, and this is, it's called EPT richness, but it's basically a measure of stream health. So this is the diversity of sensitive species in the stream. And basically, after you get 3% impervious, you go from, having, a mean of about 12 sensitive species of these groups, ranging from about 6 to up to 22 or 23, right? So really nice range of diversity in these undeveloped watersheds, and you go immediately drop lower once you go to 3 to 10% imperviousness. So 3% imperviousness is not very much. I mean, that's a few kind of large lot scale developments in a kind of a big watershed. And Curry's Fork has a lot of watersheds and subwatersheds that are kind of above that 3 to 10% range. They're definitely above 0 to 3% range. So, and then once you get above 10%, we have, we kind of bottom out. So and 10% imperviousness, again, is not very urban, right? It's pretty much suburban, and not even dense suburban. It's more like large lot size development. Very similar to the Oldham County development. And these data are from 73 sites all across a 3-county area in northern Kentucky, with a big range in imperviousness from 0 to 40% impervious. But the key here is these streams have a variety of stormwater management in their watershed. So from basically no control, so no stormwater controls other than just getting rid of the water, to pretty modern stormwater controls. So flood control detention, and even what's called water quality detention, so water quality volumes. And we still see this drop, right? So we don't see necessarily like the stormwater controls that we're investing in actually protecting our streams and preserving the richness there. And this is not unique to Northern Kentucky. Those are data from Northern Kentucky, but this is so consistent across the world that they call it the urban stream syndrome. And basically, urban streams face a variety of impacts from altered flow regimes, more stormwater runoff, water quality and toxicity, things like road salts and things like that, fertilizers. It changes in energy sources, so like stream bugs need the leaf litter that comes in from the trees every fall. Well, if the riparian zone is mowed down and there's no leaves getting into the stream, then that's an impact, right? And then even the habitat structure, right? So sometimes streams get channelized. This is kind of a great picture of a classic urban stream. This is from Springfield, Ohio. If you're ever up that way, you can say hi to this stream. But this is pretty representative of a lot of urban streams. And then even invasive species. So you see this is a honeysuckle branch here, and honeysuckle is notorious for shading out all the native plants, changing the timing of the leaf fall, and a whole lot of other impacts, and actually leading to more erosion on stream banks. But anyway, all those sort of accumulate to have a biological response. And stream ecology is extremely complex. And I'm an engineer that really has to have things organized in a more accessible way. So this is an oversimplification of stream ecology, but I really like it. Sort of putting it in boxes, we call it the stream function pyramid, where you think about it, you know, the flow regime and the amount of water getting to the stream is sort of the base of the pyramid, right? Without water, you don't have aquatic life. It's kind of the definition of aquatic life. So it's kind of at the base. And then, you know, how much water gets to the stream affects how erosive that is, how deep and how fast it is, the hydraulics. And then how deep and how fast it is affects the erosion and the form and the sediment transport in the stream, so and the stability of the banks. So that's our third tier. And then, you know, the more unstable the banks are, the more sediment coming off the banks, the more impacts in terms of water quality impacts and you know, kind of the chemical impacts associated with that. And then all of that, you know, like collectively affects the biology, right? So the biology, those critters have evolved, you know, for decades and millennia even to the natural flow regime, right? So you change the natural flow regime, even if you keep the water quality perfect, you can still have biological impacts, right? So the idea is anything below can affect whatever's above it, right? You can kind of go here to here, or you can go here to here to here to here to here, right? Kind of a cascade of effects, or you know, sort of a direct effect. And then conventional stormwater management, you kind of put that on the bottom because you're affecting everything, right? So you're affecting the flow regime, so increased runoff, and then, you know, increased stream power, which means increased erosive power on the banks in the bed, and so more habitat degradation, more total suspended sediment and other non-point source impacts, and all of that sort of has these cumulative impacts to the critters that live there. So that's how we kind of think about it and organize it, at least in my engineering brain. And to sort of step back and kind of compartmentalize, I like to think about, all right, how did we get here? So what's the history of stormwater management? Because we've been putting a lot of money in stormwater investments for a long time, and you know, we're still seeing these kind of detrimental impacts in our streams. So let's figure out how we got here. Because no one did this on purpose. No one was like, I want to develop here and I want to cause impacts downstream, right? Like no one's choosing that, right? We're just doing what we're told to do, and then things are happening downstream, right? So let's figure out how we got here. And so you take here's a kind of a hypothetical 2-year discharge from a 2-year design storm. This is time on the horizontal axis, and then the discharge of the flow on the vertical axis, and this is we'll call this the pre-developed flow regime, and under you know, pre-1950s even to about the 1980s or so, the development approach was basically get rid of the water, right? So put some houses down, put some roads down, and get that water away from those houses and away from those roads as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Get it routed to the nearest stream, and you know, we've got the water away from the people. We don't have mosquitoes and diseases and all those things, and things. Life is good, right? And so, but what we know, even in clay areas with clay soil, like Oldham County and a lot of Kentucky and a lot of this whole Midwest region, subsurface soils are clay. They don't let a lot of infiltration through. But even that top soil layer, and the trees with the leaves and the interception storage in the leaves, and that topsoil layer, that shallow infiltration, even that is a lot less runoff than you know, pavement, right, and rooftops. And so you see a much larger volume of water and a much higher peak coming from the post-developed regime, right? And send that water downstream, and guess what? More water. Those streams had sort of evolved over, you know, centuries to kind of handle the flows that they were, you know, typically used to, and we've just added a whole lot more water to them, and so we see a lot more flooding downstream, right? And engineers see that and they say that's bad, right? It's our job to protect society. We take an oath to do that, right? So this is not a good thing. So let's solve it, right? So then in about the 1980s to about the 2000s, we implemented the kind of the best practice, standard practice was called peak control detention, where you take all that extra volume, right, all that extra flow, and you route it into a detention basin, and that detention basin attenuates the release so that we're not exceeding the peak, right? So this green is what's coming out of the detention basin, right? The red's coming into the detention, the green's coming out of it. And you see, we don't have a flow magnitude that exceeds the pre-developed peak flow, right? And that was you know, wasn't a bad start. Like that was, we don't want to make flooding worse, right? But what you see is we get a lot longer duration of flows that are pretty high, right? So under pre-developed conditions, the flow came up, it got, you know, to this level, and then it went back down. And now we've got this long, drawn-out duration that, you know, it's a change, right? It is a change. So what you notice if you ever see one of these conventional detention basins, and I do make my kids stand next to detention basins to take pictures. I'm like, hey guys, where's the water? Like it just rained, where's the water, right? And the reason there's no water in this detention basin is because those detention basins really don't start to attenuate flow until you get to about the 2-year design storm. That's usually about the smallest flow that detention basins are designed to restrict, right? And so you end up with pretty large, what we call low flow pipes that, you know, that release water from the basin. And those tend to be water comes in, water goes out, right? And a lot of detention basins, especially in northern Kentucky, have even a concrete channel that connects the inflow to the outflow so that, you know, you don't have standing water in the grass. And long story short, what comes in, what goes out on most events in a typical year. And in northern Kentucky, the 2-year rainfall is 3 inches in 24 hours. 3 inches, like think about that. 3 inches is a lot of water, right? You know, a quarter of a foot. And I think Oldham County, Louisville, I think it's maybe about a little bit less than that, maybe like 2.9 or something. Don't quote me on that, but you can look it up. But it's northern Kentucky's fairly close to Louisville, Jefferson, and Oldham County. But anyway, 99% of the storms in a typical year, basically all the storms in a typical year are less than that 2-year storm. That's just kind of by definition. Like the 2-year storm statistically happens once every 2 years. It has a 50% chance of happening any given year. So on a typical year, it's not going to happen. And what happens when you get, let's say, just 0.3 inches of rain in 1 hour? So, you know, a tenth of that 3 inches, right? A tenth of the 2-year storm, and this is a raging river, right? And this is a small watershed, 2.2 square miles, about 30% impervious on a summer day, okay? Here's a picture of an undeveloped stream, same size watershed, about 2 square miles, 3% impervious, and it had, you know, basically 0.3 inches in an hour, and it had 0.4 inches in 2 hours, so basically the same storm. And this is what you see there. And I get questions like, hey, this picture looks like it's raining, and this picture looks like it's sunny. Are you pulling a trick on us or what? And the answer is, we actually took this at the peak flow. This was during the peak flow, 3 hours after the rain stopped. We've got a gauge at this site, and so we show, here's our water surface, right? And then here's our rain, right? So we get our rain, and then you can see a very tiny blip right during the rainstorm. And then 3 hours after the rainstorm, we get an increase, right? And what that is the rain hitting the leaves, dripping down from the leaves, hitting the topsoil, soaking into the topsoil, hitting that clay subsurface, and then slowly making its way down to the valleys, right? So about 3 hours later, we get cool, clean water that's just a blip in the hydrograph, right? Recharging base flows. That's what these critters that live in the stream are used to, right, on a 0.3 inch event. So pretty big difference if you lived along a stream all your life and somebody put a development in upstream, and this is what you see, you know, every 0.3 inch event rainstorm, right, versus this is what you're used to, this is what you grew up as, right? So you can see where stakeholders that care about the stream or live next to the stream, have property next to the stream, they might say this doesn't seem like optimal, right? Can we do better? The other thing about that first flush idea, so about letting water just shoot right through your basin, right? So what goes in equals what goes out. The other thing about that is all the stuff that it carries, right? So, I personally don't fertilize. My neighbors fertilize. I don't hate them for doing it, right? I mean, you can have green grass. That's fine, right? I like to pick up after my dog. If you don't want to pick up after your dog and you want to step in it, that's fine too. like people can do what they're going to do, but ultimately, if we don't have a way to manage and intercept those pollutants, they're going to end up in our streams. That's just a fact, right? And so, whether it's and a lot of the folks who've been around a long time have seen this. For 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we had a big push in Kentucky to get better sediment and erosion control on construction sites, right? And there was a big manual, lots of training, because everyone can say this is bad, right? Even if you don't particularly care about the streams downstream, no one likes to drive through that. No one likes to walk through that, right? There's a lot of reasons why stakeholders would say this is bad, right? It just looks bad, right? And so, we've been improving on our sediment and erosion control on construction sites. We're trying to avoid the milkshake water, as we call it, right, in our streams. But you can imagine if you're a stream critter and you're used to clean, cool water, and you're getting a bunch of milkshake water from sediment, or fertilizer with that's kind of burny. If you're a fish, it might burn you. Or a lot of excess bacteria. If you like to swim in the stream, that's not good. So anyway, we said, that's also a problem. And we put our engineer hats on and said, and we came up with another strategy. And I think this is actually a very reasonable strategy at tackling this problem. So we have the regional flood protection that kicks in around 3 inches. And then we said, you know what? Let's try to intercept all those pollutants and knock the pollutants out of the first flush. But let's not be unreasonable. Let's not say we have to take 3 inches of rain and route it into the ground, right? Because that probably didn't happen under pre-developed conditions anyway. But what's a reasonable approach? And so what's been the standard of practice basically across the country for the last 10 years or so is that you take about what we call the 80th or 90th percentile event in a typical year, and which tends to be a modest amount of rainfall. So in northern Kentucky, it's 0.8 inches. I think in Louisville, I think it's 0.75 inches is their water quality volume. But you basically make a tweak to your investment to capture a modest amount of volume and get it routed into a water quality management feature. And so what in a lot of cases that is just you dig your detention basin that you had planned on doing anyway. So you were going to do this for flood control anyway. And what you do is you put a sediment forebay upstream of it, and then you have an underdrain that is protected by gravel, and you make sure that 0.75, 0.8 inches of volume runs through that gravel and gets filtered before it discharges to the stream, right? It gets slowed down and it gets filtered, right? So that has been the kind of standard of practice across the country for the last 10 years or so. And again, I think that's a pretty reasonable thing to do, and it hasn't changed dramatically in the amount of investment that was required on development sites. You were already digging the hole anyway for the detention. So that, you can do that you can make them pretty. This is more of a rain garden style, bioinfiltration style, right? You can have you can kind of make them decorative. But at the end of the day, they're basically just holes in the ground, detention basins that treat the first flush of water, right? So the problem is we've got this gap where above your water quality volume, below your regional flood control protection, where stream erosion tends to occur. These sort of high flows that happen, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year that get pretty high, right? They didn't used to get super high, but without management, they get a lot higher, and they can contribute to stream erosion. And so, now is a good time to kind of go back to the fundamentals of stream erosion. And we call it the critical discharge or the critical flow for stream erosion. People have been studying this since the 50s, so we're going on 70 years of science in this. But basically, for any stream, there is a threshold where once you get to this flow, you're going to mobilize the particles on the bed, right? And here's an example. You can YouTube this, but if you kind of keep your eye on this red rock up here, we're going to just do a couple screenshots. So that red rock is gone. Here's another red rock. It's starting to move, starting to roll, and then it's gone. So it's totally entrained, right? So kind of go back through it. So the first one's gone. This red one's starting to go, and then it's caught in the flow column. It's gone. So that flow for that size rock and that slope and that flume, the critical discharge has just been exceeded, right? And so it's gone. If you were a bug that lived on that rock, that could be catastrophic. That could actually kill you, right? You could get crushed. At a minimum, you're going to let go of the rock and try to float away, right? Let the water sweep you away, but that might kill you too. So anyway, for the bugs that live on those rocks, that's a big deal. For the fish that eat those bugs, that's a big deal, right? Because that's happening more frequently than it used to, right? But look at this spot right here. Like, it used to have a rock that was up to about here, and now the surface of the rock is way down here, right? So the big deal geomorphically and stream stability wise is the stream just got deeper, right? So by eroding these pebbles more than they used to be eroded, we're making our streams deeper, right? And so what we've got with our conventional flood control design, which kind of, again, this is the 2-year. You take, this is a hydrograph in which the critical discharge is here, this dashed line. So you look at how much power is above the dashed line under the pre-developed conditions, and how much power is above the dashed line under the flow control, flood management conditions. And you see we got about 2 to 3 times as much damage being done on the stream than the stream was used to under pre-developed conditions, right? So no detention was bad, but conventional detention, which prolongs that hammering of the stream, right? You got 2 to 3 times the power that lasts 2 to 3 times as long. You're going to erode about 2 to 3 times the rocks, right? So you do that over and over. So say you get a flow that mobilizes the particles, right? And then maybe a few of them get replaced, but then you do it over and over and over, right? All of a sudden, you're going to start getting deeper, right? And that deepening causes a kind of a chain reaction of impacts in our streams, and we'll go to it in the next slide here. But basically, stream deepening and widening, property loss, tree loss, and then of course water quality impacts. So typically, the streams respond in sort of, as they get deeper, they sort of respond in this nature. And this sequence, we've measured it in labs over, again, 50 years of research, but we've also seen this across basically the whole Midwest. This is how streams change when you either channelize them or put a bunch of urbanization upstream. And so they first, you've eroded the particles that were on the bed right there, right? So you made your stream deeper. And when you made your stream deeper, that made the banks taller, right? Just geotechnical engineering tells you that, a taller stream bank, a steeper angle, that makes the banks unstable. Geotechnically, they start falling in, right? So you enter the phase of mass wasting, where the bank is too steep and tall to actually hold up itself, and it fails by its own weight, right? So this bank is unstable, and you don't even need more flow to hit it. It can just fail due to gravity, right? And then over many, many years and decades, in most cases, you end up having this unstable bank, and it keeps widening until it gets so wide and so flat that you start to see deposition and aggradation at the toes of the banks, right? So it's the stream has responded so much that it can no longer move its sediment on its bed, and it starts to aggrade. And then again, in many cases, years or decades, you see that aggradation become colonized by vegetation, And once you have colonization by vegetation, you start to strike a new balance. We call it equilibrium with the flow regime. So the stream has become steep enough or shallow enough, or it has become coarse enough that it has been able to reach a new equilibrium with whatever you did to it. So whether that was channelize it, or whether it was add too much water to it, or whatever. And this process happens, again, throughout the Midwest. And it's actually a really useful process when you're looking at a stream and trying to figure out, like, all right, there's a road right here, and it's in this stage of channel evolution. Well, that road's in big trouble, right? Like, because this bank is not going to fix itself, right? Whereas, like, you know, if you're in this stage and you're just starting to see, you know, incision in your roads over here, you know, maybe you got a chance of heading that off. But anyway, this is a kind of a tool that we use a lot when we're assessing a stream. The big point is this is a very predictable trajectory of channel change. Go ahead.
What kind of time frame are we looking at from stage 1 to stage 5?
That's a great question. So in our Northern Kentucky data, and which is pretty similar to here, pretty sticky banks, right? You don't usually see, like, every year you lose an inch of bank, right? Usually it happens like in a big slump, right? So it could be like this for 3 years, 5 years, and all of a sudden you get a big slump, right? And you lose like 3 or 5 feet in 1 year. So we just did a memo for SD1 on this that kind of looked at all their sites over about a decade of monitoring, and their average rates of widening were about 4 feet per decade. So, you know, about 0.4 feet per year on average. But again, you don't usually lose 0.4 feet exactly every year. It's more like, you know, in a 5-year period, you might lose 2 feet or even 4 feet. But the range of variability was pretty big. So the average was about 4 feet per year. But, you know, you could go from basically 0 to, you know, up to, you know, like 10 or even 15 feet in a decade, right? So it's a pretty big range. And then as far as deepening rates, they were more like, I want to say, on the order of about 1 foot per decade or something like that, about 0.1 feet per year, something about there. That I can send you the actual paper and get the exact rate right. But the bigger point is, this tends to be a long process, right? You know, you need the flows to happen, and you know, these geotechnical failures, they're unpredictable, you know, and so it tends to be, you know, kind of on the scale of decades to working itself out rather than you know, years. And the caveat being, if you change the flows, if you have an intervention with the flows upstream that kind of restores a less erosive flow regime, then you can actually see immediate results. They'll still be gradual, but you can see a change in the trajectory of the stream. But they've been doing this. They've been the longest running study was about a 50-year study by one of the kind of grandfathers of this field out in Maryland, and it was it was like I said, a 50-year study. And a very old suburban development in Maryland, and they really weren't even at this point after 50 years. They were getting close to this point in sections, but they weren't quite back to that. So, you know, it takes a while. And the point is, if you live next to a stream that's got a bank like this, you know, without intervention of some kind, odds are you're going to be in trouble if you got an asset right there. Because for the stream to naturally restabilize, it's got to get so wide that it can no longer transport a sediment and it's starting to aggrade, right? So you got to go extra wide to then start to recover. So that tends to be a lot of problems for our infrastructure, and you know, in suburban areas, particularly in rolling hills like Oldham County and Northern Kentucky, you know, a lot of our infrastructure is right along the valley floor because that's the easiest place to put things like sewers and, you know, water lines, things like that. So it tends to eat up our infrastructure pretty, you know, commonly. This is so that was a profile or a cross-section view, like you're standing in the stream, but this is kind of, you're looking at the stream from the side, a profile view, and the point here is, when streams get shallower, they also impact their habitat. So, you know, you're not only getting deeper, but if you're dropping less elevation over the same distance, you actually have less room for riffles. And riffles are like the shallow, fast flow areas. that you see in a stream where the water's kind of ripply. And the reason that's important is there's a lot of taxa that evolved to live in those riffles, right? If you've got a nice diverse stream, you got some species that like pools, you got some species that like riffles, right? And if you've got less and less riffles, then you're going to have less and less of those sensitive species that like the riffle habitats, which is another indicator of kind of poor biological health. So just by the nature of eroding all the pebbles that can form the riffles, you're losing your riffles. And then, of course, bank erosion. Nobody likes that. That's what we were just talking about. This is eating up a fence. Lots of sediment coming off this bank. And this stream has eroded through bedrock. And we have a lot of streams on bedrock here in Oldham County. And the problem with streams on bedrock is once the bedrock is exposed, it actually weathers a lot quicker than if it had a layer of pebbles on top of it, right? So as you have exposed bedrock, that starts to weather, and then if you eat through that layer of bedrock, a lot of times what's beneath our limestone is like another 4 or 5 feet of shale that goes like that, right? So then you can go from having a pretty shallow stream, decent connection to the floodplain, all of a sudden, 5 feet deeper, right? In a matter of, decades rather than centuries. So that's not a good process either. But in terms of water quality and Division of Water's interest and Congress's interest, sediment is a leading cause of impairment in our nation's streams. It's actually the leading cause of impairment in, I want to say, Kentucky and Ohio. If it's not the first, it's the second. Usually sediment and bacteria are right up there. And we know from just intuition, that's a lot of sediment, right? But we also know from a lot of data that this amount of sediment, a lot of the sediment in our waterways comes from bank erosion. And just to kind of put it in perspective, so here's a watershed plan up in northern Kentucky, Gunpowder Creek watershed plan, pretty similar to Curry's Fork. These are the kind of standardized loads of pollutants in these different sampling sites, and we've got developed kind of mixed use and rural. And you see our biggest pollutant by far is sediment. Bacteria is number 2. And we've got data at all these cross sections showing, look, here's this stream in 2008. Here it is in 2012. You see these trees are gone. Here's the bank has eroded to the point where the tree is now gone, right? And you see that here. So here's 2008. Here's 2012. This is about 3 feet of erosion here at the toe of this bank, right? We also had here's a bedrock piece. This bedrock piece is now gone, right? It's this point still here, but this straight part is gone, and you see that in this cross section right here, right? So we've got incision through bedrock in a matter of 4 years, right? It's not to say that all bedrock erodes at 4 years, but the point is we've captured that process that we just asked about. But this 3 feet of erosion at that stream, and then all the other rates of erosion we measured at all of our other sites, if you kind of project that out in terms of a load, what you end up with is that the amount of erosion we've seen at our stream banks explains 100% or more of the sediment in our water. The sediment that we measured in our water, we've got 100% of that can be explained by just bank erosion. It's not to say that that's the only source of sediment in our water, but it's saying bank erosion is so high that all of the water column sediment could be explained by bank erosion. So it's we probably have some construction site runoff, some coming from that. We probably have some other sources, but in general, our bank erosion rates are high enough to explain a lot of the sediment in our water. Number 1 pollutant in our streams. Even if you don't necessarily care too much about water pollution, though, or habitat, this is a really nice property, right? This is a really nice house, large lot development. Look at this tension crack along this bank. This is like probably 6 feet of bank that they're losing. That's their property they lost, right? I mean, you used to be able to use this property. They mowed it, right? They were able to use it, and now it's gone, right? So that, I mean, you can see where, again, numerous stakeholders would have, from multiple perspectives, would have issues with, like, it'd be great if we could manage stormwater in a way that, reduces the risks of this happening, right? And the ducks are pretty, but man, this bedrock stream does not have a lot of habitat, right? Like, it's just that all the pebbles have been blown out, and now the banks are starting to erode. And in terms of that process of losing the pebbles, we literally see this in our data. We actually count 100 particles at each site year after year. And so you take a site like this that's got lots of different sizes of pebbles, and eventually the trend is you start plucking out all the smaller stuff, and you end up with really large particles, right? And then eventually, in a lot of our sites, we're down to bedrock. So we've sort of eroded all the kind of rich habitat particles, and progressing towards more homogeneous habitat. Here's the data. This blue line is 2008 sample. So the median particle was about 1 inch in 2008. In 2012, the median particle was about 16 inches. So all those 1 inch particles, they're gone, right? And a lot of half of the particles are smaller than 16 inches, half the particles are larger than 16 inches now. It used to be half the particles were smaller than 1 inch, right? And that's 4 years in this rapidly developing watershed that, again, had a lot of conventional detention upstream of it. So here we go. This is kind of a picture speak 1,000 words thing. Two watersheds, similar sizes. This is a reference site with very little impervious area, less than 1%. Here's a lightly developed watershed with 9% impervious. And you can see the difference. And just so you know, I'm not cherry picking because this is a nice summer picture and this is a terrible winter picture and there's no vegetation. You can see, you can imagine, like, this tree didn't grow like this. It didn't choose to grow like this, right? There used to be a bank here, right? Or the bed used to be a lot shallower because those roots didn't choose to be exposed, right? So here's their actual cross sections, right? So about 3 feet to the floodplain for Middle Creek, about 9 feet to the floodplain for Owl Creek. 1% impervious versus 9% impervious. So those are real differences, right? That unstable streams impact resources and waste money, again, impacting property. Lots of infrastructure along these stream valleys, right? So lots of sewers end up getting exposed. This is 275, the loop around Cincinnati. So we're, I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but it's never a good sign to have the toe of the slope of an interstate to be exposed by erosion, right? So these are real impacts. We did an inventory for SD1 in Boone County one year, and in 1 year there were, I want to say over several $million. I think it was $3 million in impacts to state roads in 1 year that were attributable to stream erosion and flooding. So, we all drive on roads, right? Unstable streams are not good for roads, right? So the point is, this is kind of the conventional management is pretty unsustainable for not only our streams, but also our infrastructure and our societies. So how can we optimize that to be a lot better, right? And, even concrete walls can fail if the stream keeps getting deeper, right? You've just undermined the foundation, the wall collapses, and, people start paying attention when their route to work is collapsing into the creek, right? So it can become quite a problem. And so the future of stormwater management, not only here but across the globe, is really paying attention to your stream to figure out what flows erode your streams and making sure that post-development you're not making that worse, right? And so you figure out what that critical discharge is for your stream or your region, and you make sure that each storm that exceeds that, you're not exceeding it at a larger peak or duration than was happening under pre-developed conditions. So here's a lot of the kind of the modeling that has gone into this, but this is a 50-year simulation, and Q critical is our dashed line here. So this is the flow magnitude on the horizontal, and then the cumulative duration over 50 years on the vertical, and this is a log scale. But basically the red is the post-developed, the blue is the pre-developed, and what you see is we get a lot higher peak flows, but those peak flows, those red flows last a lot longer. So let's take 38 CFS. Over a 50-year period, it happened for 1 hour under pre-developed conditions, and now it's over 10 hours, right? So that's 10 times the work at that flow, and we know this flow causes erosion because it's on the right side of this Q critical, right? And you see the difference between the red bars and blue bars. That's pretty continuous across all these big flows, right? And so the idea is, you'd like to manage the stormwater to put all this extra volume and release it on the safe side of Q critical, right? And that's what these green bars are. So you kind of pay attention to the red bars and now the green bars, right? We got no more green bars over here, and we have higher green bars on this side, right? You see that? So we're taking all that extra volume, holding it, releasing it in a way that's not causing erosion downstream any more frequently than happened under pre-developed conditions. So we're still exceeding Q critical. See, the green bars still exceed. We still have a few minutes at 38 CFS, but it's not more than an hour at 38 CFS over that 50-year period. Same for all these other flows that exceeded Q critical, right? So that's the idea that Q critical gives you, we call it the safe release rate. And if you can do that over, 50-year simulation, 20-year simulation, over the long term, you're not going to have any more damage, any more erosive power in the stream after development than was happened before development. So if Q critical is that important, obviously, we got to figure out what it is, and it's clearly not one size fits all. Right, and again, we've been studying this for about 70 years. But again, you can just use your intuition. I mean, the flow that erodes a boulder is much different from a flow that erodes a cobble or a gravel or sand, right? And so let's take, here's a particle diameter on the horizontal, and then the depth to mobilize that particle if you're in a stream. And these are different slopes, right? So let's just look at 1% slope, right? 1% slope. If you have a marble, let's see, I got my prop here. Marble this big, right, on a 1% slope, so you're falling 1 foot over 100 feet, right? You only need about a half a foot of depth to mobilize this marble, right? All right, so not a big flow, right? If you have a golf ball, so if the golf ball was a rock, we're still in the gravel range, it'd be about 0.3 pounds, and you would need about a foot of depth to erode, stream particles like this on a 1% slope. I'm going to trip on that. If you had a softball, so I mean, we're getting bigger now. We're in the cobble range, right? This is 2.5 feet, so we're getting deeper to erode this on a 1% slope. And then if you are a softball or a soccer ball, much bigger, right? 30-pound rock, right? On a 1% slope, you got to be basically as deep as me, right? You're nearly 6 feet of depth to erode particles this large, about 30 pounds, if it was a rock, right? On a 1% slope. So again, this is stuff that we've been measuring in a lab for 70 years. It makes intuitive sense, but it matters how big your particles are at your stream sites. And so we've been doing this we've been studying this in Northern Kentucky for a decade or so, and it takes basically counting the rocks and measuring the particle sizes on the stream bed to figure out how big they are, how heavy they are, what's the flow that's going to cause erosion. And you typically need to do this at a lot of sites, and particularly like the sites that are not developed, your more reference sites, to figure out what is that Q critical for kind of the regionally representative kind of pre-development target that you'd like to have. And one more kind of thing for the biologists and ecologists in the room. So I've been talking a lot about stream erosion and engineering and river mechanics, but the importance of Q critical is even important at our reference sites. And you can see that in the bugs and in not only in the geometry of the stream, but in the bugs. So here's a reference site with perfect habitat, perfect water quality, great undeveloped flow regime. It's forested and hayfields upstream. There's no development upstream. And in 2011, we saw 4 events that exceeded Q critical, right? And normally normally we get like 1 event that exceeds Q critical in a year. And so our cross section got about 30% bigger between 2010 and 2011. And our bugs went from basically excellent to poor, right? These are all measures of biological health, and here's our 7 years of data at this site. And so you see in 2007, no matter how you're measuring biological health, no matter what metric you're using, we take a nosedive in 2011. in 2011, the bugs at this reference site, again, best of the best in Northern Kentucky, the bugs were more similar to sites that had like 10 to 20 to 30% impervious area on any given year. So just, again, we didn't all of a sudden like dump a bunch of pollution in this stream. We didn't, develop it or anything. All what happened was we had 4 really big storms that year in an undeveloped, perfect stream. And that impact, just the mechanical impact of that erosion, caused our bugs in this perfect stream to be as bad as a site that has 20% impervious area, right? So what that's saying is, like, normally you can't study bugs in the field and kind of control for all the things like water quality and habitat, because urban streams have a lot of impacts, right? Well, this was a study at a reference site where we're just controlling for Q critical, right? Just erosion of the bed, and the water quality didn't get worse or anything else. So we know for a fact that the Q critical was exceeded because the channel got deeper, right? We saw that in our bed particles as well, and our bugs were terrible. And so what that says is, if it's not the only impact to a stream, but if you don't minimize the Q critical exceedances, if you don't match that pre-developed disturbance regime, you're going to basically set yourself up for a cap, right? That pretty much coincides with where we see our developed streams on a regular basis. So our developed streams are kind of at that cap that is right in line with where our bugs were at this reference site the one year we had some really bad storms, right? The difference is, at a developed site, you're getting hammered every year if it's conventional management, whereas the reference site, we bounce back immediately, right? The bugs bounce back when the weather goes back to normal, and that's a dangerous phrase these days, but when the storms were less erosive the next year, we saw recovery in the bed, and we see recovery in the bugs. So here's another way to look at it. This is basically stream health versus the days since a disturbance event, the number of days since a Q critical event. And you see here in 2011, we had a disturbance event really close to the sample date. Our bugs were terrible. And the more days we have to recover, the more days you got for the rocks to be stable and be recolonized by the bugs that are still there, the better the bugs are, the better the biological health is. So increasing biotic integrity versus increasing recovery time. It's the same for channel enlargement or geomorphic recovery. So the closer you are to a Q critical event, the more channel enlargement you see, the more difference you have between the last year's survey and this year's survey. But the further out you are from a Q critical event, the more time that channel has to recover on its own using vegetation to, the roots to restabilize and things like that. Go ahead.
Are you saying on that undisturbed stream, that was all a natural occurrence?
That's right. It was just the weather. Yeah, so we got a whole paper about it that kind of shows you it was 4 events that exceeded the critical discharge, and one of them was, I want to say, 2.5 times the critical discharge. So it was those were not more frequent and larger Q critical events, but they were not affected by development. Let's say that. I mean, it was the weather doing it, not anything else. There were no other factors.
So are you trying to prevent the what normally would happen there, or are you just use that as a base?
That's exactly. So under normal conditions, I mean, if your stream has erosion sometimes, naturally, then the bugs that live there and the fish that live there depend on that. They just depend on it to be that natural frequency, right? And so when we disturb them too frequently, we kind of end up in that cycle of channel evolution where instead of kind of restabilizing, the rocks sort of filling in from other rocks, the vegetation colonizing bare spots, the bugs coming back, because we've had a lot of days between disturbance events. If you disturb them, like 3, 4, 6 times a year instead of maybe once a year, then you start to be down this cycle of degradation that ends up lasting a long time. Go ahead.
Can you just talk a little bit more about the recovery and what all goes into that?
Yeah. So
like the channel eroding, for example. What occurs during recovery to make that go back to something close to what it used to be?
Yeah. So what you see here in the red line is 2010 and the orange line is 2011. So that got deeper, right? And it got deeper across, mainly on this side, right? But over time, 2012, 2013, 2014, you see this bar building over here, and that bar is getting colonized by vegetation. And basically, if you measure we call it the bank full area, how big the channel is below the top of the bank, roughly, is the definition of that. The area of the 2014 channel is within about 10% of the area of the 2010 channel. So the pre-disturbance channel. So incrementally, it's kind of recovering to what it was, because what it was an equilibrium. And equilibrium isn't static, it's just the channel isn't getting larger over time, right? It's got the right geometry for its watershed. You might have a little bit of bank erosion on this side, but you're going to see deposition on this side, and over time, the channel's not getting bigger, right? So that recovery happens in an undisturbed watershed. In a disturbed watershed with frequent disturbance, you don't have that time for vegetation to colonize this deposition, right? You got too much energy, so the stream is trying to dissipate that energy by making itself flatter and making it wider, right? And that's that long process of channel evolution.
Question also.
Yeah.
Those 4 storm events you're talking about, what kind of event are we talking about? Is it measured as a 2-year storm, like 10-year,
Yeah.
something, so you can put it relative to something like we're designing to this, how this is.
Right. So you see, like this is excellent. This was like good. This there's like in 2010 it's a little bit worse than 2009 and 8, and then this is 2011 when 2011 was a 40-year event. 40. Yeah. This in 2010 wasn't a 40-year event, but it definitely exceeded Q critical, right? And so what you see here, the best way to think about this, so see this scatter year to year, right? That's all lumped. We have lots of sites in the 0 to 3% category here. They're all lumped here. And you see, any given year, we've got a lot of scatter. Like it could be really great, like here, or it could even be poor, right? So, but over time, that reference site is going to be the best that you have, right? And so whenever you're doing a sampling program, actually, it's really important to always sample a reference site, because you could be measuring just a bad year, just a bad rainfall year. It could have been a drought that disturbed it. It could have been a Q critical event or whatever. But the reference sites in Northern Kentucky, again, best of the best, these things bounce around from, excellent to poor. Now, poor was the worst that it's ever been. But you see this natural bouncing around strictly due to the weather. Again, no development's going on upstream, no logging's going on upstream, nothing's changing in this watershed. But what's interesting, so this is MBI, which is kind of a big aggregate metric of a lot of things that they're measuring in the bug community. But this is taxa richness, and what that is basically diversity. So how many different species you have at that site. And what you see is the year after the record disturbance was our richest year. We actually need those disturbances occasionally to sort of reset the system, because what happens is if you don't disturb the system for very long, like for too long, all the weedy species get outcompeted by the longer-lived, more competitive species, right? And they start to kind of knock down your diversity. If you disturb it too frequently, all you have is the weedy species, and those species that take a long time to get colonized, they're not there, right? And so you get your greatest diversity when you've got that natural mix of, infrequent but frequent enough disturbance, basically the natural disturbance regime. And so we're not trying to release all storms below Q critical. We're just trying to not do it more than it happened under pre-developed conditions. And generally, conventional development releases it way more frequently than under pre-developed conditions. But yeah, all the biologists that I talk to, they get worried about this policy because they're like, well, you're going to over-control, and then you're not going to. I'm like, guys, if we ever over-control, then let's have that conversation. But we're pretty far away from over-controlling at this point. So anyway, that's a great question. So these are data from California, Victoria, Australia, and Kentucky. And what you see is when you take the Q critical for a site and you standardize it by the 2-year discharge, so the undeveloped 2-year discharge, you get a really nice relationship across bed material size. The problem is this is a log scale and there's basically 3 orders of magnitude in the scatter, right? And so you really do need to kind of calibrate it to your stream, or at least your region. And California has got a huge spread. Like these red dots go from, basically always disturbed every time it flows to something like 10% of the 2-year discharge, or even 100% of the 2-year discharge. But in northern Kentucky, our reference sites are telling us that the Q critical value is about 40% of the 2-year discharge. So the gravels and cobbles in our streams in northern Kentucky can hold up to a pretty big flow. Like 40% of the 2-year discharge is, you don't really want to stand in a flow that's big because it might knock you over, right? So we've got some pretty resistant streams in northern Kentucky. People have used these types of data to sort of come up with regional Q critical targets for their region. So Santa Clara, California was the first to do this. Their systems are a lot sandier. They're more sensitive, so their Q critical was 10% of 2-year discharge. San Diego has classes depending on what kind of stream you're in. So you can be 10, 30, or 50% of the 2-year discharge, depending on if you have kind of a more resistant stream or a less resistant stream. And in northern Kentucky, we have about 40% of the 2-year discharge. And interestingly, even in bedrock streams in northern Kentucky, what we see is the threshold to basically erode the vegetation at the toes of the bank and on the bars also tends to coincide with that 40% value. So even if our pebbles aren't there, our rates of enlargement still coincide with this 40% of the 2-year discharge threshold. So it's kind of applicable and a good target for lots of different stream settings in northern Kentucky. And in order to try to induce that deposition, keep that deposition stable long enough for the vegetation to colonize it. There are also stream-specific requirements. So these regional requirements are just saying, here's the development manual, and here's your target, right? And you don't have to go out and actually do anything at your stream. But there are some states and municipalities where they do stream-specific requirements. So New York State requires that on projects draining greater than 50 acres or more than 25% impervious, you basically hire someone like me and they go out and do an assessment of the stream, figure out what that Q critical is, and then tailor the management on each single development, right? San Diego, California has that screening level analysis required in all projects. Some of your more sensitive streams, they end up requiring some extra analysis. In northern Kentucky, all it is if you've got a site that drains more than 100 acres, a facility that drains more than 100 acres, you need to probably talk to Northern Kentucky SD1 and basically they'll work with you to figure out what kind of potentially extra modeling might need to be required. But in general, the large majority of the development sites do not have facilities draining larger than 100 acres, so they just kind of use that standard 40% value. So we do all this extra sediment transport modeling on kind of the municipality side, on the research side, to figure out how can we optimize our stormwater rules and regs in the simplest way possible and still get what we want in terms of no extra erosion in the stream, right? And so we use these continuous sediment transport analyses. So this is a top 20 event, so it's largest 20 storms in the last 20 years. And what we show is, just as an example, so this is the difference in sediment transport to the pre-developed regime. So under no detention, but post-developed, we've got about 1,000% worse than pre-developed conditions. For flood control detention, we've got about 300% more sediment erosion than we had under pre-developed. For flood control and water quality, we're still at about 200% worse than pre-developed conditions. But if we add this channel protection control, we're basically right on the money. We're minus 11% relative to the pre-developed conditions. Go ahead.
Is there any differentiation between surface detention and underground detention in the downstream effects?
There's definitely potential for site-specific differences and effects on that level of detail. In terms of the the sediment transport though, like so it's in an underground detention, if it has the exact same hydrograph being released as a surface detention, like the rocks don't care, right? Now if it's cooler water or whatever, I mean the nuances of the different facilities can make some differences, but in general, in terms of sediment transport, there's no difference if the hydrograph between one approach and the other approach is exactly the same. So, and again, we're kind of doing a lot of modeling to then get at pretty simple design guidance, is what we're trying here. And so using a top 20 analysis type, continuous simulation type sediment transport analysis, we've been able to figure out that we can effectively match the sediment transport of the pre-developed regime with this channel protection control. And so that can lead to pretty simple implementation. And so what that's been in Northern Kentucky is any facility draining less than 100 acres, you got to release the 2-year storm at a peak discharge of less than 0.4 CFS per acre. So that's a pretty simple, like there's no extra modeling there. You don't have to hire someone like me and like do sediment transport modeling. You don't have to do more design storms than you already did because you're already doing the 2-year event, right? You just have a new design target for your release rate. So we're lucky because Northern Kentucky has some resistance in it. Oldham County probably has some resistance in it as well. If you're out in California where the streams are much sandier and smaller gravels, like you kind of do need the continuous simulation to make sure you're not exacerbating erosion. But here we're able to say if you do this, if you design to this for the 2-year event and you meet your water quality volume and you meet your flood control volume, no matter what BMP you use, you're not going to make the erosive power of the flow regime worse than it was under pre-developed conditions. Like you just can't do it. You can't make it worse if you meet these pretty simple criteria. Now on those facilities draining larger than 100 acres, it can get pretty difficult to meet this 0.4 CFS per acre criteria. So if you want to, you can use continuous sediment transport modeling to figure out, can I release it a little bit differently and still meet the intent of the rule? So the exception to the rule is basically, it might make your facility a little smaller, but it's going to be more design time, right? So that's kind of the trade-off. So for about 2 years, SD1 did things like this at their, they do annual trainings and to all their developers and contractors and engineers, just kind of talk about, how erosion control on sites is doing and how, just kind of general trainings and things like that. And they rolled this idea into these trainings, and then they started it with a credit policy. They said, if you meet this new Q critical policy is coming, but we're not going to require it yet. We got a year to get used to it. And if you happen to meet it for this first year, you can get a credit on your stormwater fee, right? And then after this 1 year of training and knowing about it, then we're going to require it on every project, right? And so all it was a simple letter. They didn't even change their rules and regs. It was just a change in the design target within the rules and regs. So they didn't even have to open the rules and regs up to do this. But basically, they issued a front and back letter to everyone that said, here's our new design target. And again, here's what they used to have to do. So the water quality volume, 0.8 inches, the 2-year, 10-year, 25, 50, 100. No changes for all these other flows and events that they have to do. And then the 2-year, instead of releasing it at what the pre-developed 2-year was, you got to release it at 0.4 CFS per acre, which is basically 40% of that pre-developed 2-year flow. So you had one change in design target, and that's it, right? From here, it was all about how do you do it, training, right? We're not asking for more storms, but well, do I design my flood control basin and just make the basin bigger to meet this Q critical requirement? So then we had to kind of walk folks through how you optimize this. But again, the implementation goals is our current trajectory is you take an undeveloped stream like this, you put development in, you invest a lot of money in your stormwater controls, and you still end up with this, right? We're trying to break that, right? So we're trying to prevent future problems by optimizing our stormwater controls on new development, right? And then on streams that already look like this, that have already had development, we're trying to mitigate these problems by finding cost-effective retrofits and other stormwater interventions in the watershed to hold back more water, release it at ways that don't cause erosion, and start to see recovery, okay? So we're going to give you some examples of this and then conclude with an example of this. So the first is a bioretention basin. Something like this. Again, it's basically just a nice looking detention basin. I know that like the green engineers would like, say, no, it's this, this, and this, and this. I mean, you're trying to get infiltration into the ground. You're trying to cool the water, release it, mitigate the temperature regime. You're also trying to get better water quality treatment with the subsurface chemistry that goes on. But in general, it's still a hole in the ground, and it's still taking up the same size lot that you were going to lose with the detention basin, right? So step one, size it for flood control, right? And that basically is driven by the 100-year event, right? You figure out how big you need to make this basin to not make flooding worse for the 100-year event, right? Step two is the water quality requirements. You can't let 0.8 inches of rainfall out without it going through some sort of treatment, right? That's typically a gravel, like infiltration-based discharge that, is basically under drain protected by gravel, right? Is pretty much the water quality criteria that a lot of people use. So that sets sort of your low flow. Basically, you can't have an open window above or below the depth of ponding that the 0.8 inch event will happen, right? And then step three is, what's that 2-year storm doing? And let's make sure we're not releasing it at greater than 0.4 times the undeveloped Q2. So in this example, the Q2, undeveloped Q2 was about 18 CFS, 0.4 times that is about 7 CFS, okay? So what we were seeing when we first rolled this out was that, folks would do it, they'd get, traditional detention basin, about 4,000 square feet, and about 2,500 cubic yards, and then they add the water quality and they can make the basin even a little smaller with bioretention in terms of the footprint. They made it a little larger in terms of the excavation, but pretty much the same size as flood control. And they were already doing the water quality BMP, by the way. But then when you added Q critical, and to meet that 2-year requirement, the basins were getting larger. So they were getting larger in footprint and larger in excavation. And what we realized was that folks weren't really optimizing their outlets to meet that Q critical requirement. They were just making the basin larger to meet that requirement. And so what we showed them with a lot of workshops that had some examples, step-by-step examples, was look, you can use the exact same retention basin that you were going to do with your water quality, and if you optimize the windows, you have the exact same size. And it just took about 2 additional design hours. And so here's an example. Here's what we mean by that. So this is basically a big box that is regulating the release of water, right? And so at the underground, we call it the underdrain, right? That's your kind of water quality volume release. Up here, the top grate and these windows, those are letting out like the big flows, like the 100-year flows, right? And then where do you put this window in order to meet that Q critical requirement, right? And so you do multiple iterations, right? You go from 2 windows up here to 3 windows up here, maybe a window lower, and then eventually you land on, here's a window, there's another window, and then two windows up here, right? And that pretty simple optimization, about 2 hours of design time, that meets our Q critical criteria and gets us at our goal. So basically, this ponding level is still above the 0.8 inch event, right? So all those first flush volumes are still going through the underdrain, but then we start letting out water in a small window that is not exceeding Q critical, and then we don't let it get to this second window until it's larger than the 2-year event in this case. Now in other cases, you might still go through the underdrain for the 2-year event. It's all different in each case, right? But that's the idea of optimizing, right? You're not making the basin bigger, you're just figuring out how to release it with these different window configurations.
So all these studies that were performed, actually became standard for SD1.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So there's standards, and then we're doing trainings like this to basically walk engineers who weren't used to this. Like, what do you mean by optimize, right? So this is what we mean. Like, just change the windows. Try a window smaller and lower. Try one higher. Those kind of things. But in general, you should be able to kind of meet these criteria without making your basin bigger than it needed to be for the water quality and the 100-year design.
So did this go into the new, say, design standards for SD1 area?
Yeah, so the standard, basically, all they did was issue a letter that says, here's the new design target, and to get your permit, you have to meet this criteria. Now, they are in the process of updating their rules and regs to do a whole lot of other things, and this will go into that officially, but it's already implemented through, basically, I think a lot of people have in their rules and regs, they have the ability to sort of change it based on new information, right? And so SD1 has, when I said the study about the roads falling into the creek and like $3 million in damages in 1 year to state roads, well, SD1, about 10 times less than that number, so about $300,000 per year is being in impacts to their sewer lines based on unstable streams. And they've got 3 counties and a lot more people than Oldham County, but still, that's a lot. Those are real impacts to their infrastructure based on instability that they could prevent or at least reduce by better stormwater management. So it's, in SD1's opinion, it's in their best interest to, not only from a regulatory standpoint and keeping their streams healthier, but also financially protecting their infrastructure, right? I mean, exposed sewers from stream erosion and exposed manholes from stream erosion, cost money to fix, right? And so they're trying to, they're looking at this from multiple angles. But yeah, it's required now.
Okay, so for those who may not be familiar, that's Sanitation District 1?
That's right.
How many districts are up there in North Kentucky?
They're the only, I don't know why they have the number 1 on their name, but they're the sanitary and stormwater utility for the 3-county region. Now, I think Florence has its own stormwater, but maybe they do their SD1 sanitary. I'm not exactly sure. It's not every single community is in SD1,
Almost
but pretty, yeah.
I ran into that on a project up there. Around here, it's mostly county to county.
Yeah, yeah, and right, and so anyway, SD1 has rolled this out, and with some pretty prescriptive training, and sometimes the plan reviewer will receive the plans and they'll be like, well, you're not meeting Q critical, and then they can't necessarily design it for them because the engineer's got to design it, but they can kind of give us some tips like, hey, did you try this size window, or but basically they've got pretty much 100% compliance at this point. You can't get your permit without complying, so it's all good. We did do a case study example of enhanced swales because some sites don't have room for a big basin, and particularly like KYTC, they don't want a lot of ponding next to their roads necessarily. They also don't have room for big ponds. So can you do something better in a linear way? And so what we used, we got this from Illinois DOT. They've been doing enhanced swales. So basically, every single highway in Kentucky, unless you're in a really urban area, has a swale down the median and on the sides, right? And instead of a grass swale, all it is a swale with gravel on the bottom, right? And if you're on a steep slope, you probably need riprap, right? If you're on a flat slope, you can just use, small gravel. But basically, instead of getting to the bottom and then shooting down slope, you're getting to the bottom, infiltrating into this gravel, slowing the water down because the gravel, water can't flow through gravel as quickly. And in doing that, it's not a big change to the design. You already have aggregate on site for your highway projects, right? And what we were able to do is size these swales to meet the Q critical requirement and still meet the flow control requirement and the water quality volume requirement. And basically, go from not meeting any of the goals of the Clean Water Act to meeting all the goals of the Clean Water Act with just a tweak to the design. of what they're already doing. They're already doing conventional ditches, so if you just amend the swales, and it adds very little cost to the project. So relative to a conventional ditch, it's about 6% more to do it. Relative to a curb and gutter and pipe, it's actually saves money to use these swales. And then, just to do curb, to replace the pipe only and keep the curb, it's about 3% more than what was already going in. And again, most of these facilities weren't meeting even flood control criteria before. So here's a pretty simple, cost-effective way to do this along roadways. Example 3, an extended detention basin. All extended detention basins you got a basin, you put a 4-bay in it, and then at the downstream release, you got an outlet protected by rock that's forcing the water the first flush to kind of go through rock here and then go through rock again, and make sure you're meeting that water quality criteria. And again, the two-year flow pre-development is about 18 CFS. No control is 39 CFS. The post-control without the Q critical criteria, just meeting flood control is 15, but we can do the same exact basin, just tweak the outlet and meet our Q critical, which is 7, and same size, and it took Nora about 45 minutes to do this. Now, Nora is a machine. She's awesome. She's been doing this a long time, so it's not going to take everybody exactly 45 minutes to do this, but the more you do it, the quicker it gets. So in general, a little bit more design time to optimize the outlet, and you can comply with this, but it's not another storm you have to run. It's not continuous simulation. It's not a new model you have to buy, right? It's pretty simple. So my last example is, you say this is easy, right? Well, prove it. Like it's one thing to do it on a new basin, but if you're saying you can use the exact same size as you were going to before, what can you retrofit an existing detention basin and meet the same goals, right? So this is a retrofit of a detention basin where here's the pre-retrofit outlet, so a big pipe, 18-inch pipe, and then another 18-inch pipe, and then the spillway, right? Flood control only basin. There was not water quality in this basin. This drains a Toyota parts facility up in northern Kentucky. And we did this with EPA, SD1, Boone County Conservation District. This was a pilot project to basically prove the concept. So EPA got involved because if we can make this work, it's a pretty inexpensive way to optimize the resources that are already in the ground and get a lot better results in our streams rather than building new facilities, right? So what we did is we have a low flow pipe within a restricted outlet, right? So take an 18-inch pipe and make it like an 8-inch opening, and then have this bypass. And this is the key, right? So you're ponding more water. You're on the low flows, you're holding back more water, right? But on the high flows, you still want to get access to that 18-inch pipe with that pressure that's built up behind it. So this extra opening here basically allows that water to get out during the extreme events, the 100-year events, and not cause overtopping in the basin, and not, basically meet the same performance that it was before the retrofit for the big flood control events. So here it is in action. So this is an event where the ponding is right at that 18-inch crest, right? And under pre-retrofit conditions, it probably would have been blown right through, but it's really holding it back on this. And that was a real event. So here we are on the design storm events. And I know these slides are hard to read, sorry about that, but basically under pre-retrofit conditions, the 3-month, 6-month, and 1-year event all exceeded Q critical. So that means statistically, every 3 months, so 4 times a year, the pebbles are getting eroded downstream, the bugs are getting disturbed, and you're starting those cycles of channel erosion downstream, right? And under the post-retrofit conditions, we're able to take the 3-month, 6-month, and 1-year event and not exceed Q critical. And we could almost get there for the 2-year. We got to 0.47 cubic meters per second, and we needed to get to 0.38 cubic meters per second. So the 2-year, we're not quite there. So, and again, this was just a conventional detention basin. There was no water quality component to it. So, we got really close on a conventional basin and meeting that new regulation or new rule without having to make the basin any bigger, right? Now, that's great. Those are just design storms, right? What are we actually seeing in the stream? So again, EPA was a partner on this, and so they had lots of monitoring on this. So here we have a peak inflow. So we have a rain event of 1.3 inches. We have 20 feet per second coming in, and we have only 4 feet per second leaving, right? So that's a huge restriction, and here we are, some pictures, right? So big flush coming in, and then it settles out, and then another big flush coming in, really dirty water, right? And you're just holding that water for like 3 or 4 extra hours, letting that sediment settle out, letting more contact time for UV treatment and everything else. And more than anything, just metering that release, like restricting that release at a rate that does not exceed erosion in the stream. And there we go, right? And then we're back to kind of like trickle flow. One of the things that we really were delighted by on this study was because we have so much more time of ponding at pretty shallow depths, we're actually saturating the topsoil a lot more than we did under pre-retrofit conditions. And because of that, we're actually prolonging base flow in this system. And these are continuous gauges. So here's our site, and then we got, we call it the spur, which is our immediate receiving stream. We got an upstream control site, so flow goes this way, and then a downstream site. And we had gauges in each of these. We had channel surveys at each of these. And basically, you compare the pre-retrofit period to the post-retrofit period. All of the big flows, so here's our upstream site, and these are the biggest flows. The upstream site, the big flows, actually got worse. So the upstream control site got worse simply because of the weather, right? There's no development that went upstream or anything else. At our spur site, the big flows got lower. And then at our downstream site, they were basically a wash. But one of the things we were really happy with was at the low flow end, we have a stream that used to go dry about 10% of the time, and now it basically never goes dry after the retrofit. Because we've held that water during the event, saturated the topsoil, and then making it slowly release through the topsoil, we've taken a stream that used to go dry, again, 10% of the time. If you're going dry 10% of the time, you can't support fish, right? Now we can support fish in this system. So we've got minnows living in these pools downstream of this basin that never used to be there, right? That's a real, like, tangible benefit to the aquatic resource, right? And this is during September low flows when, you know, the weather is such that, you know, you don't expect to see pools wet in an intermittent stream. Now, in terms of geomorphology, we see, here's the pebble counts, and we see a grading at our spur site, so immediate receiving stream. So we're seeing deposition at our experimental site. We're seeing continued coarsening at our upstream control site. So again, the weather got worse, made the flows worse upstream, and you know we see coarsening at the upstream site, but we're seeing a grading at the spur site because we're restricting those flows. And downstream site, a little bit of aggradation as well. But then you see habitat starting to improve. And these pictures are kind of hard to tell with the lighting in here, but basically at the spur site, you see these banks that, you know, looked raw beforehand. This is in 2013. The retrofit went in December of 2013. 6 years later, 5 years later, we're seeing benches developing here, right, and bars developing here. So that basically is improving the banks, right? That process that we were saying, that cycle, we're actually seeing that happen. It's even easier to see it at the downstream site. So here's raw bank at the downstream site, tree with exposed roots, and then huge bench that's been colonized by vegetation, tree that no longer has exposed roots, right? So the downstream site where the spur controls about 50% of its impervious area and about 13% of its drainage area has flipped the switch on the downstream site from continued degradation and instability to recovery, right? So we're pretty happy with this. That's a real measurable improvement in habitat. Probably went from like a poor, if you're going to rate the habitat according to Division of Water's habitat index, went from poor to average, which is a meaningful improvement. That's not just a visual thing. I mean, it's obviously apparent with the picture, but here's the bench that's been colonized by vegetation, that survey in 2017. So here's where that's was in 2013, 2014. So bench development and colonization by vegetation. And then at the upstream control site, again, the weather got worse. We had a stream that looked like this with vegetated benches, and now we don't see benches and we see more eroded banks. So at our control site, that has about 7 to 8% impervious area in its watershed. We're seeing continued degradation where there's no stormwater control upstream. Stormwater retrofit for Q critical here. We see improvements here and even here where you are controlling even less of the drainage area. So the idea is you take a stream like this, you retrofit some detention basins upstream or put in some new controls upstream, and you start to induce deposition at the toe of the bank, right? Eventually that deposition gets colonized by vegetation, right? And not just temporary vegetation like grasses, but actually like permanent vegetation like trees, right? When you start to see that process, you are really changing the trajectory of the stream from, continued, down cutting and widening to more of a recovered point. And if you can do that, you've saved a whole lot of money in stream stabilization. We do stream stabilization, stream restoration, but it costs a lot of money to do in stream, bioengineering, putting boulders here, getting new plants established. That is certainly something that's in the toolbox, and you got to do it sometimes to protect infrastructure. But if you can throttle back the flows and address the root cause of the problem, it's much more sustainable for the system and tends to be a lot less expensive. So, sorry, go ahead.
Was that a regional basin in the area that was there for SD1 under their control?
That was actually,
Opposed to a private?
yeah, that's a great question. So that was actually owned by Toyota, and it's their. If it's not Toyota, it's whoever they rent the property from. But I feel like they're the owner because we had to deal with Toyota's corporate office, and yeah, we just had to prove to them that we weren't going to make flooding worse in their parking lot and just show them the elevations, and that was that simple. So that was a private basin. Now, SD1 does consider incentives for private owners. So like, if you didn't have to meet Q critical when the basin was built and you retrofit it to meet Q critical, then maybe you can get a credit on your stormwater fee. So like because they're trying to do this systematically across their jurisdiction, and little by little with watershed grant supports and things like that, they're kind of chipping away at it. But you kind of need more private participation to get at the scale we need to get at. And luckily the airport's a big landowner up there, and there's some other large landowners where you can retrofit a few basins and have a pretty big impact. So we're taking this to the watershed scale there. But on the other side of that coin, demonstrating that it works to retrofit it is also kind of proof that the new policy will work to protect future streams from, to protect streams from future development, right? You're actually, it might not be perfect, but we know it's a lot better than the conventional, right? So we might see, it's not exactly perfect, we need to tweak it in 10 years or 20 years, but in general, it's a lot more protective than the status quo, and, we got real mechanistic rationale to think that it works, and then we got real evidence that shows that it works. So, yeah, go ahead.
I know there are a lot of variables, but do you have any idea on the cost for that retrofit structure?
Yeah, great question. So, have you all heard of Site Supply? Colin Browning's their rep. So we patented that technology with EPA. It was funded by a grant from EPA that the whole purpose was to develop technologies that can be taken to market. And so we patented it with them, and Site Supply has the license for that. And so you have to talk to Colin about pricing, but in general, it's on the order of, say, $10,000 to $20,000. It depends on this, how big it is and how much engineering time it takes and things like that. But in general, that device with the bypass, say 10,000, 20,000-ish, we've retrofit a lot of other basins that have, those big boxes, big box outlet control structures, where we just put a plate on a couple windows. And those are like $3,000 to $5,000, So retrofits can be pretty economical depending on, all the circumstances. One thing with retrofits to kind of put on my civil engineering, public safety hat is you definitely want to consider what are the consequences of overtopping the basin? Like, is there a spillway, right? If there's no spillway, like if there's no design spillway, maybe we should put in this design spillway when we retrofit it. If there is a spillway, but it's in jeopardy, maybe we should fix it, right? I mean, if there's somebody that lives right downstream in the floodplain and they're at risk of an overtopping event, those sort of safety risks obviously trump the channel stability risks. But all in all, we think it's a really good opportunity for kind of watershed scale projects, because we're optimizing resources that somebody already paid for. They're already in the ground. Let's just get better performance out of them. That was pretty much it. I did skip this. I did want to just to start with this. This is basically the manual of practice by ASCE and WEF from 1992. Okay, so I mean, I know I've got a lot of science on my side and a lot of data on my side, but this is not new stuff, is the point of this. Like, since 1992, we've known about this in not just like on the fringe engineers. This is like ASCE, the civil engineering society, and they've known about this for a long time. So let me just do a quick quote from it, so it's not me. It's not just me saying this on my soapbox here. So, urbanization disrupts the natural equilibrium of streams. The increased imperviousness and hydraulic efficiency generate increases in peak runoff. If such increases are not minimized, the natural streams will enlarge their channels by scouring their banks and beds. So, since 1992, it's been in our manual. Like, we know that this happens, right? Now, I've just spent a lot of 2 hours like talking about the process and the mechanics of it, but basically we've known it's a problem for a long time. It takes a while to get our policies optimized to make it more easily to implement. But I mean, I used to teach at UK, and I mean, it's kind of surprising when you step back and you're like, man, we've known about this since before you were born, and we're still doing it the way that caused the problem. So anyway, you can tell why I'm a little passionate about it, but pretty simple way to, optimize our investments, protect our streams, and, help our stakeholders. So yeah, go ahead.
In the presentation, you mentioned a couple places in California and New York that has sort of implemented the Q-critical and SD1. What other locations are you aware of?
Yeah, so I actually got my PhD at Colorado State, but my research project was in Southern California. And so that's why I know about those cases so well, because I know those streams. But I know North Carolina basically has what's called a channel protection volume, which is something pretty similar to Q-critical, but it's more about like delaying the center of mass of the hydrograph of the 1-year storm by 24 hours or something. So they know it's a problem, but they've got a little bit more complex way to manage it in North Carolina. Different states are doing different things. In Ohio, they have what's called the critical storm method, which is not the critical flow. It's a different thing. But basically, on a lot of developments in Ohio, it's all an equation of how much imperviousness you have. But they use some formula, and in a lot of sites with high impervious, you end up taking the 100-year post and releasing it less than the 1-year pre. So, people are doing it different ways, and some, maybe it's over control, maybe it's not. No one has proven to me that like this works or it doesn't work in these other places. I'm just talking about the places I know. But I know people are doing it across the nation, and it's kind of the last leg of the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act says physical, chemical, and biological integrity. So we've been worried about non-point source pollution for a long time, the chemical piece, and the biological piece is a kind of directly connected to that. But the physical integrity, like we've been saying you can't pour concrete down the stream bank for a long time, but in terms of actually managing stormwater to not disrupt the physical integrity, that's kind of where it is. And we've actually, SD1 took us to a Senate testimony way back in 2012 because they were worried about kind of a one-size-fits-all policy. And, their perspective was you can't infiltrate in clay. Like, you can't have a policy that is based on some other setting that says infiltrate, the 2-year event and not have any surface discharge, right? That's just impossible in the clay. So their whole message to that, that Senate subcommittee was, look, we know our streams really well. We think we've got a reasonable way to protect them and meet the goals of the Clean Water Act. And also our stakeholders in the community, including the developers, are part of this process, and they're, they're on board with this idea of, basically just tweaking what they're already doing. So, yeah, it's not necessarily. I don't think kind of a mandate from U.S. EPA headquarters is coming down per se, but a lot of people are making progress, and I think that's a good thing, because if we don't make progress locally, it's kind of left for others to say you must do this, right? So anyway, that's where we are, at least with my clients.
Even with the flow rate being reduced, you still have that volume that's going to create over a longer period of time, but it's still an improvement.
Exactly. That's the whole point to the regulators that really weren't, it's nothing against them. They're just not in clay soils dealing with how do you, you've got all this extra volume because you've taken away topsoil storage by putting pavement down and rooftops down. Got all this extra runoff. If we just put down pervious pavement, all it's going to do is infiltrate it and hit the clay and keep running off, right? So and that's expensive anyway. Let us manage that volume in a way that doesn't cause damage to our streams, right? And actually prolongs base flows in some of these streams that could use some more base flow. So, it was kind of a win-win, but I think it was a success from look, let's use the local data. I mean, it's not just me saying this is what I think. This is real data showing this is what they need and this is what works, right? Yeah, so you can't get rid of that volume. You're not going to magically make it disappear, so let's just make sure we don't cause damages with it.